I returned from Europe to find my parents sold my dream house to fund my brother's vacation. But they didn't know the trust clause would ruin them. This narrative is about a betrayal so profound, so heartbreaking, that it wrecked my entire life, all at the hands of the people I was supposed to love the most. What would you do if your own family sold your home, your dream, to pay their extravagant falsehoods and your brother's insatiable spending? My name is Silas Rowan, and I am a 35-year-old worldwide marketing consultant. I've been living independently since I was 19, when I left my middle-class household in Pasadena, California, ready to forge my own path. I'm not one to dwell on the past, but in order to really comprehend what occurred, you must first understand how I grew up in a home where affection always seemed to slant in one direction. My parents, Robert and Maribel Rowan, appeared to lead regular lives. My father worked in a bank. My mother was a freelance accountant. We had a tiny house with a white picket fence, a minivan, and a life that outsiders would consider stable. However, the situation within that residence was far from stable. My younger brother Cassian is 4 years younger than myself. And I could tell there was a significant difference in how my parents handled us from a young age. Cassian has always been the golden boy. He was a slacker who never worked more than 6 months at a time, but my parents constantly shielded him and made excuses. Cassian's still finding his way, my mother would say, even after he quit his 5th job because his employer simply did not understand him. Meanwhile, I worked my buttocks out. I paid my own way through college, juggling 3 jobs, waiting tables, delivering packages, and working as an office assistant, all to graduate debt-free. I didn't resent it then. I was confident that my hard work would pay off. And I had one person who actually believed in me. Thaddeus, my grandfather. Grandpa Thaddeus was my rock through those difficult years. He was a burly man, a construction worker with harsh hands but the kindest heart. He'd sit with me on the porch, telling me stories about his childhood and how he built his life from nothing. Your strength is your true asset, he'd add in a deep, steady tone. Money, houses, cars, they're just tools, but your will, Silas, that's something no one can take away. Those words carved themselves into my consciousness, a small flame leading me through countless long days. I was 19 when he passed away. He left me a trust fund, which I could only partially access at the age of 26, as long as I proved myself worthy. So I did. After 7 years of hard work, I utilized some of that trust to put down payment on an old craftsman home in the Pasadena suburbs. It wasn't a mansion, nor was it spectacular, yet it was everything for me. That was my ideal house. A 1-story wooden house with a large porch, stained glass windows, and a little backyard garden. It was ancient and required repairs, but I adored every crack in the hardwood floors and cracked brick in the fireplace. I spent months working on it myself, sanding the floors, repainting the walls, and replacing window panes. I even planted a rose garden in the backyard to memorialize my grandma, who adored roses above all else. Every time I stood in that garden, taking in the beautiful aroma of the flowers, I felt as if she was still there, smiling at me. But my parents and Cassian never recognized the importance of the house. To them, it was simply a pile of old wood. The kitchen's outdated. The walls are peeling. It's a waste of money to fix, my mother once commented when I had them over for dinner to show off my new home. Cassian was worse. He scoffed, calling me insane for investing in a chicken coop instead of a sophisticated downtown condominium. I merely grinned, knowing they didn't get it. The house was more than just a place to dwell. It symbolized the years I had fought. The sleepless nights were spent working. When I told myself to be stronger. Cassian and I were not only different in terms of personality. It was in the way our parents handled us. Cassian received everything while I had to scrape together every dime to buy my house. A new car? Parents purchased it. Pocket money? Every week Mom would slide it into his hand. Credit card debt? Dad paid it off. I wasn't jealous. Not really. But I couldn't shake the sensation of great unfairness. I had done everything correctly. I studied, worked, and stood on my own 2 feet. Nonetheless, every time I returned home, I'd hear my mother gushing about Cassian's new chances, or my father discussing Cassian's impending major move. Cassian's big moment never happened. I recall going home for supper after being promoted at my consulting firm. Cassian, as usual, was moaning about being dismissed. My boss didn't know how to use me, he continued, holding a beer and staring at me. Not everyone's as lucky as you, Silas. Always having everything handed to you. I was taken aback. Lucky me, the one who strained himself to exhaustion to get here. But I did not answer. I ate my dinner in silence and then left. I'd realized that arguing with Cassian or explaining things to my folks was completely worthless. Everything changed when I was offered a great opportunity, a 6-week international consulting project in Europe, covering London and Frankfurt. It was a critical assignment that may propel my career to new heights. I was excited, but also nervous. 6 weeks was a long time, and I did not want to leave my home vacant. I requested my folks to watch after it. Just stop by a few times, check the locks, water the rose garden, I told you. A simple task, right? But when I handed my father the house key, a peculiar, unpleasant feeling came into my heart, as if I had just committed a bit of my soul to someone who did not actually value it. The last dinner before my flight was at my parents' house, a little house in Pasadena with a white picket fence and the aroma of barbecued meat from an old barbecue. I arrived in a happy attitude, expecting for a warm evening before leaving. But the moment I stepped inside, I sensed a familiar aura. My mother was busy in the kitchen, my father was watching football, and Cassian, as usual, was whining. He was splayed on the sofa, phone in hand, his voice rife with fury. Work sucks. My boss keeps giving me pointless tasks. I can't waste my youth at that company. I looked at him, fighting the temptation to ask what these worthless activities were. Instead, I nodded, sat down at the dinner table, and concentrated on the plate of steak that my mother had just brought out. My mother asked, "Silas, tell me about your trip to Europe." But I understood she was merely asking for courtesy. I began discussing the project, an international marketing campaign for a huge firm that required me to work in London and Frankfurt, meet executives, and develop tactics from scratch. It was an opportunity for a promotion, to demonstrate that my years of hard work had not been in vain. But as I talked, my mother's gaze shifted to Cassian, as if he was the one who needed attention. "Cassian's considering a new job," she said, her voice full with excitement. "A tech startup, they say it's very promising." I paused, losing interest in the dish in front of me. Cassian, who had never worked for more than 6 months, now had a great prospect. I looked at him, hoping to see some enthusiasm, but Cassian simply shrugged, his eyes fixed on his phone. "Maybe," he muttered. "But it's stressful. I need a break first." I swallowed the question that was swelling in my throat. "A break? You've been on a break your entire life." My father, who normally kept quiet during dinners like this, suddenly piped up. "Silas, you're going away for so long. What about your house?" I took advantage of the opportunity to change the subject. "Can you and Mom look after it for me? Just stop by a few times, check the doors, water the plants. I'll leave the key here." I took the key from my pocket and set it on the table. My father nodded, but his eyes seemed distant, as if he was thinking about something else. "All right," he murmured before returning his attention to the television. My mother stroked Cassian on the shoulder and said, "My boy needs to relax. Work's so stressful, isn't it?" I felt a fire rise in my chest. Stressful? Cassian didn't understand what stress was. He lived on our parents' money, although I had paid for everything myself, from college tuition to the bricks in my craftsman home. But I didn't say anything. I'd learned long ago that arguing with my family got me nowhere. Instead, I rose up, thanked my mother for the lunch, and gave over the key to my father. "I'm off. Say hello to Cassian for me when he looks up from his phone," I added, attempting to maintain a pleasant tone. Cassian simply scowled at me and said nothing. The next day, I boarded a plane for London. As the plane took off, I stared out the window and thought of my home. I imagined the rose garden, its brilliant red petals gleaming in the California sun. I convinced myself everything would be great. My parents would look after the house while I concentrated on my work. But deep inside, a small voice cautioned me that I had made a mistake. London welcomed me with precipitation and a frantic pace. The project began quickly, and I threw myself into it like a machine. Late-night meetings, constantly changing plans, and presentations to executives left me with little time to breathe. But I loved it. I loved the challenge and the opportunity to show myself. Each night back at the hotel, I checked emails, sent reports, and even allowed myself to fantasize about going home. Walking into my craftsman home, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, admiring the rose garden. But around the third week, I got a message from Cassian. No check-in, no greeting, just an Instagram link. I opened it and discovered a collection of images of him in the Maldives. White sand beaches, crystal clear infinity pools, and a magnificent bungalow with ocean views. Cassian, dressed in a white linen shirt, was smiling next to a female I had never seen before. The caption stated, "Paradise found. Need more days like this." I sat in my freezing London hotel room, staring at my phone screen and feeling like someone had punched me in the chest. What about the Maldives? Where did Cassian obtain his money? He had just lost his job, had a lot of credit card debt, and my parents didn't have enough money to pay for such a luxury vacation. I wrote back, "Looks nice. Who are you there with?" No response. I called my mother, but she didn't answer. I called my father, and after a few rings, the call went to voicemail. Unease began to creep in, but I told myself I was overthinking things. Perhaps Cassian borrowed money from friends or won the lotto. I did not know. I knew something was wrong. In the weeks that followed, I tried to concentrate on work, but the vision of Cassian in the Maldives tormented me. I began checking his Instagram more frequently, like an unhealthy fixation. Each post was a fresh attempt. A seafood meal at the beach, cocktails served in fancy glasses, a picture of him on a yacht with a smug expression. I did not comprehend. Cassian had no money, and my parents couldn't afford it, could they? I began calling home more frequently, but my parents' reactions were consistently condescending. "Silas, everything's fine," my mother stated in a brief phone chat. "Your house is fine, don't worry." Yet her voice was tight, as if she was concealing something. My father spoke even more briefly. "I'm busy. We'll talk later." I tried to convince myself that everything was fine and that I was overthinking things, but every night, as I lay in my hotel bed, I couldn't shake the impression that something was going on behind me. The 6 weeks I spent in Europe flew by. My initiative was a huge success, with delighted handshakes from executives and promises of a higher job when I returned to the States. But that joy was insufficient to alleviate the rising uneasiness in my heart. Cassian's Maldives images, as well as my parents' unusual evasiveness, were like missing pieces of a puzzle. All I wanted to do was go home, enter into my craftsman house, sit on the porch, and admire my rose garden. I wanted to experience the tranquility that I had spent my youth cultivating. When the plane landed in Los Angeles, I took a deep breath and tried to block out the bad thoughts. "Everything will be fine," I assured myself. Even though the voice in my head wasn't particularly convincing, I took a taxi to my parents' house in Pasadena to get my key. On the way, I checked Cassian's Instagram one more time, like it was an addiction I couldn't break. His most recent post made me freeze. Cassian's selfie showed him standing in front of a sparkling new SUV, a cocky look on his face. The caption said, "Welcome to the new ride." My heart pounded. Cassian didn't have the money to buy an automobile. He had recently lost his work and was facing mounting debt. So where did the car come from? When the taxi arrived at my parents' house, I spotted something that made my chest clench. A beautiful new vehicle was parked in the driveway, glistening in the California sun. Not Cassian's SUV, but another costly vehicle. I stepped out of the taxi, clutching my phone tightly and feeling like a mountain was pressing down on my shoulders. My father appeared at the front door in a new shirt, his gaze hard and soulless. "Come in, Silas," he replied, his voice low but lacking the customary warmth. "We need to talk." I stepped inside, the air thick as the quiet before a storm. My mother sat at the dining table, her hands tightly clutched and her gaze fixated on the floor. Cassian was not present, but his presence lingered like a shadow. I set down my luggage, attempting to maintain a calm voice. "Where's my house key, Dad?" I said, but the expression in my parents' eyes told me the answer would not be straightforward. My mother glanced up, her lips squeezed together, and murmured, her voice shaking, "Silas, your house. We sold it." The world around me seemed to halt. I remained there, my ears ringing as if someone had punched me in the face. "Sold?" I said, my voice scarcely audible. "Sold my house? What do you mean?" My mother turned away, afraid to bear my gaze. My father crossed his arms and spoke firmly. "We needed the money, Silas. Cassian needed a fresh start. He deserved to enjoy himself a little. And I needed a new car." I stared at my father, as if I were staring at a stranger. "My house," I exclaimed, my voice quivering with rage. "I spent my whole life buying it. Every dollar, every hour of work, every callus on my hands from fixing it up. You sold it to buy a car for you and to pay for Cassian's Maldives trip." I was about to shout, but my father just shrugged as if it were clear. "You're always fine, Silas," he replied. "You have a good job, you have money, Cassian doesn't. He needs us." I felt my blood boiling. Cassian's 30 years old. He can't hold a job for more than 6 months and you still coddle him like a child. I went to my mother, waiting for sorrow, but she only pushed her lips together, murmuring, "You don't understand, Silas." Cassian's stressed. He needed a vacation to recharge. A vacation? I laughed bitterly, feeling as if the world was mocking me. A vacation in the Maldives at a 5-star resort with his girlfriend and friends? And you sold my house. To pay for that? To buy new cars? I stepped forward, grabbing my mother's hand, hoping that this was just a misunderstanding. But her eyes told me everything, the harsh, unmistakable truth. My craftsman home, where I had poured my sweat and tears and established a rose garden to honor my grandmother, suddenly belonged to someone else. My father opened a drawer, brought out a stack of crumpled banknotes, and set them on the table. "This is what's left after we sold the house," he replied, staring at the money. I nearly lost it. I stormed out of my parents' house, leaving the key and money and refusing to speak with them again. I took a taxi to my old house. When the taxi arrived in front of the craftsman home, my heart felt broken. The stained glass windows were still present, but the drapes had changed. My rose garden appeared odd, as if someone had messed with it. I got out of the vehicle, stood at the gate, and then saw them, an old couple watering plants in the front yard. The woman looked up and smiled at me, saying, "Hello," in a kind voice. "Can I help you?" My throat felt dry. "This was my house," I explained, my voice quivering. The man stopped watering and looked at me in astonishment. "Your house? Are you Silas? We bought this house a month ago from your parents. They said you'd moved abroad to live." I took a step back, my thoughts reeling. My parents did not simply sell my house. They lied, making up a story to excuse their acts. I returned to the taxi, unsure what to do. I contacted Orion, my best friend from college and now a junior lawyer. "Orion, I need to see you right now," I replied with a hoarse voice. Orion agreed to meet me in a local coffee shop. There I spilled the entire story, from Cassian's costly Maldives trip, his new car, my father's new car, and the most shocking of all, my craftsman house had been sold behind my back. Every syllable felt like a razor slicing through my heart. But I tried to remain cool, thinking Orion could help me make sense of everything. Orion listened with furrowed brows and a contemplative gaze. When I finished, he lightly tapped his fingers on the table, as if to organize my words in his head. "Silas," Orion began, his voice slow but steady. "Your house is not just personal property, is it? I mean, you mentioned using a portion of your grandfather's trust fund to purchase it, correct?" I nodded, sensing a flicker of light in the darkness. My grandfather Thaddeus's trust fund. I had utilized a portion of the trust to make the down payment on the house, but it was still subject to the trust, and I was the primary trustee until I reached 35. "If your parents sold the house without your consent, that could be illegal," Orion replied, his eyes brightening. "But I'm not sure about the specific terms of the trust. You need to meet with the lawyer handling the trust. Mr. Lysander, right? He's an experienced lawyer and known for being fair. I'm confident he can help you seek justice, but you'll need to gather evidence, documents, contracts, anything that proves they did this behind your back." I sat there with my heart beating. Orion's remarks were like a lifeline in the storm. I faintly recall talking with my grandfather about the trust and how he wanted to secure the assets for the future generation. I believe he included a protective provision stating that anyone who purposefully stole trust assets would lose their inheritance. "Do you think I have a chance?" I inquired, my voice shaking. Orion grasped my shoulder, his gaze unwavering. "Find Mr. Lysander. Gather evidence. I'm certain you have a strong case here." I exited the coffee shop, my mind racing but with a glimmer of hope. I had not merely lost my home, I had lost my sense of security and trust in my family. But if Orion was correct, and I could prove that my parents and Cassian had gone too far, I might be able to restore what was mine. The image of my rose garden came to mind, but it was clouded by my father's chilly expression, my mother's evasive gaze, and Cassian's smug smirk on Instagram. I clenched my hands, determination burning within me. They believed they could take everything from me and walk away unharmed. They were wrong. I would unearth the truth and make them pay. I quickly called Mr. Lysander, the lawyer in charge of my grandfather Thaddeus's trust. I'd only met him a few times, the last time when I was 25, when he outlined the basic conditions of the trust and enabled me to use some of the funds to buy my craftsman home. His voice on the phone was as deep and calm as I recalled, but there was a tinge of worry when I told him I needed to see him immediately away. "Silas, are you okay?" he inquired. "No," I answered, my voice husky. I need your help. Something big has happened. We agreed to meet in his office in downtown Pasadena, a little structure with polished oak panels and the odor of old paper. When I stepped in, Mr. Lysander rose up from behind his desk, his white hair and round glasses like characters from classic novels. He shook my hand, his gaze piercing and warm. "Sit down, Silas," he urged, motioning to the leather chair across from him. "Tell me what's going on." I took a deep breath, attempting to contain the emotions that threatened to overflow. I told him everything, including my 6-week work trip to Europe, Cassian's Maldives images, my father's new automobile, and the most shocking news: my parents had sold my Craftsman house without consulting me. They said they needed the money for Cassian, for his fresh start, I continued, my voice quivering from rage. But that was my house, Mr. Lysander. I used money from my grandfather's trust to buy it. How could they sell it without my permission? Mr. Lysander listened, his hand resting on his chin, and his gaze never leaving me. When I finished, he sat silently for a bit before standing and walking to a filing cabinet in the corner of the room. He took out a big folder covered in dark brown leather, with Thaddeus Rowan Trust tastefully engraved on the cover. "Silas," he whispered, his voice low but heavy. "That house isn't just your personal property. It belongs to the trust, and you are the sole trustee until you turn 35. If your parents sold it without your permission, that's a serious matter." My heart raced as if a ray of light had penetrated the darkness. "How serious, Mr. Lysander?" I inquired, my voice lowering to a near whisper. He opened the folder, flipped through a few pages, and then pointed to a highlighted paragraph. "Let me explain the trust clearly," he claimed. "When you turn 35, the trust's assets will be distributed as follows. Your parents, Robert and Maribel Rowan, each receive $550,000. Your brother, Cassian Rowan, also receives $550,000, and you, Silas, receive $1.1 million. You have full access to that $1.1 million before you turn 36, as you did when you used part of it to buy the house, but your parents and brother can only receive their shares when you turn 36, and only if they comply with the trust's terms." I nodded, attempting to digest the information. "And if they don't comply?" I inquired, realizing that the response would change everything. Mr. Lysander looked me straight in the eyes, his gaze as keen as a sword. "There's a very clear clause in the trust, Silas. Any beneficiary who forges, misappropriates, or sells trust assets without the trustee's consent, that's you, will immediately forfeit their inheritance. Not only do they lose their share, but they could also face legal consequences depending on the specifics of their actions." I sat there astonished, as if the ground under me had shifted. They forfeit their inheritance. My parents have $550,000, as does Cassian. Everything may perish as a result of what they had done. I remembered my grandfather's words. "Your strength is your greatest asset." Was this his method of protecting me, of preserving what I had created? "So you're saying if I can prove they forged or misappropriated the house they lose everything?" I inquired, my voice trembling, not from fear, but from a strange combination of anguish and delight. Mr. Lysander nodded. "Exactly. But we need evidence, Silas. Documents, contracts, signatures. Anything that proves they acted behind your back. If they forged your signature or used illegal means to sell the house, we could not only recover the property but also activate the forfeiture clause." He paused and looked at me sympathetically. "But you need to prepare yourself. This isn't just a legal matter. This is your family." Family. The word pierced my heart. My parents, who had raised me, had betrayed me. Cassian, the sibling I hoped would grow up, was involved in this scam. My eyes ached, but I refused to cry. "I understand, Mr. Lysander," I answered, my voice more stable than expected. "What do I need to do next?" Mr. Lysander placed his hand on my shoulder in the same manner that my grandfather used to. "You need to gather evidence," he replied. "Find out how they sold the house, who bought the paperwork was signed. If there's any sign of forgery, signatures, notarizations, anything, we'll have grounds to act. I'll support you every step of the way, from filing a lawsuit to enforcing the trust's clauses. But you have to be strong, Silas. This won't be easy." "It, and how?" I nodded. I felt a surge of determination like never before. I remembered my Craftsman house, the rose garden I'd planted to commemorate my grandma, and the nights I'd spent trying to establish my life. They had seized everything, but I would not let them win. "I'll find the evidence," I replied, my voice steely. and I'll take back what's mine. As I left Mr. Lysander's office, I felt as if I were entering a battle. The Pasadena sun continued to shine brightly, but there was a storm inside me. I took out my phone and texted Orion. You were correct. The trust has a protection provision. I'll need your help. I wasn't sure where to begin, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to stop until the truth was out. I remembered my parents, Cassian, and how they used to make me feel inadequate and unworthy. They assumed I would remain silent, take the loss, and move on. But they had no idea I was Thaddeus Rowan's grandson, the man who taught me that genuine strength lay in will. And my will became an unquenchable fire. I decided to begin at the most painful point, my craftsman home. I needed to meet Isolde and Dorian, the elderly couple, again to delve deeper into the transaction. When I last stepped in front of the house and saw they had moved in, all I knew was that my parents had sold it using a counterfeit signature of mine. But I wanted more information: who met with them, what the paperwork was, and whether there were any additional hints. On the way there, I clenched my fists, attempting to resist the sensation that my heart was being crushed. The Craftsman house loomed in front of me, with its familiar stained glass windows and the rose garden, which had been trimmed unevenly like an unhealed sore. I knocked on the door, my pulse racing. Isolde opened it, her eyes recognizing me instantly and her welcoming grin now tinged with concern. "Silas, you're back," she murmured, her voice quiet yet strained, as if she knew I wasn't there to say hello. "Come in." I strolled into the living room, where Dorian was seated with a newspaper in hand, although his eyes were apprehensive of me. "Mr. Silas," he murmured, setting the page down. "What's new? Last time you mentioned something about the house. We're still not sure what's going on." I took a long breath, attempting to maintain a steady voice but unable to conceal my determination. "Isolde, Dorian, I'm sorry to bother you again, but I need to know more. About the sale. I believe my parents forged documents to sell this house. I need evidence to take back what's mine." Isolde and Dorian exchanged glances. Then she up and took a stack of papers from a drawer. Isolde replied quietly, "We don't want to get into any trouble. Your parents and your brother, said you were moving abroad and needed to sell quickly. They brought a deed of transfer with your signature and notarized documents. We paid in cash, and everything was finalized in a few days." I clutched the papers, my heart beating. The sale contract was in my father's name, Robert Rowan, and the document of transfer was reportedly signed by me. But that was not my signature. It was quite near, yet the strokes were wobbly and inconsistent, as if someone had attempted to duplicate it. "This isn't my signature," I explained, my voice catching. Dorian frowned. They also provided a notarized document confirming everything was legal. We had no reason to suspect otherwise. I requested permission to photograph the documents, feeling as though I had discovered the first piece of the puzzle. Isolde stared at me, her eyes filled with concern. "If you're telling the truth, we're victims too. We paid for the house, moved in. If something's wrong, we need to know." I nodded and promised to follow up with them. I left the house with a mix of relief and smoldering rage. My parents had forged my signature, but I needed more proof to tie everything together. When I returned to the temporary rental I had taken, I contacted Orion again. He agreed to assist me in analyzing the documents and advised looking for comparable paperwork at my parents' residence. "If they took original documents from your house, they might still have them," he added. The idea of going back to my parents' house made me shudder, but I realized I had no option. I needed to address them, not to argue, but to act discreetly. I went to my parents' house one morning, knowing they would be going food shopping. I slipped inside and discreetly unlocked their file cabinet. Inside there were heaps of documents, bills, contracts, and insurance papers. My pulse raced when I discovered a folder labeled Silas's residence. I opened it and found what I was looking for: copies of the deed of transfer, notarized documents, and handwritten notes. Recognized my mother's handwriting, numbers, dates, and a message that said, "All cash offer, quick and clean." Immediately. The notarized paper, however, chilled me. The notary was described as John Thompson, although his signature was sloppy and unprofessional. I photographed everything, carefully returned it all, and departed before my parents arrived. I had almost enough evidence, but I wanted to know Cassian's role in this. He wasn't simply the recipient of the sale earnings. He might have been part of the plot. I went back to Cassian's Instagram and looked through his Maldives photographs. In one photograph, he was seen with an unfamiliar individual in front of a real estate business. I zoomed in and recognized the emblem of a local real estate firm. This was the lead. I went to the real estate office disguised as a possible homebuyer to obtain information. The agent, Selena, was ready to help. When I pushed the conversation toward the Craftsman house, she nodded. Oh, the house on Oak Street. That was a quick deal. The seller was Cassian Rowan, who said his brother was moving abroad and needed to sell fast. We found a cash buyer right away. I maintained a calm expression, despite the fact that wrath was boiling inside me. Cassian handled everything himself? I inquired. Selena nodded. He brought all the paperwork, including his brother's signature and notarized documents. We had no reason to doubt it. I left the workplace with my thoughts reeling. Cassian was not only aware of the sale, he was the one who did it. My father falsified the notarization. My mother falsified my signature. Cassian handled the transaction. They had worked wonderfully together to take everything from me. But they made a key error. They had no idea the house was related to the trust, and I had Mr. Lysander on my side. I contacted Mr. Lysander again and sent him all of the proof, including the deed with the fraudulent signature, the suspicious notarized document, and the real estate agency information. He studied it on the phone, his voice calm but determined. Silas, this is strong evidence. A forged signature and notarization are serious legal violations. We can file a lawsuit to reclaim the house, and the forfeiture clause will be activated. But you need to be certain about this. Once we proceed, your family will never be the same. I went silent, thinking of my parents, Cassian, and the family dinners that were now only memories. They destroyed our family first, Mr. Lysander, I informed you. I'm just taking back what's mine. He agreed and promised to prepare the necessary documentation. Be calm, Silas, he advised. We'll do this the right way. When I hung up, I stood in front of my hotel room mirror, looking at myself. I was no longer the Silas of 6 weeks earlier, who thought his family would never betray him. I was someone new, shaped by suffering and drive. I remembered my granddad, my rose garden, and my Craftsman house. I'd take it all back, not for me, but for the vow I made to him. The true source of strength is willpower. After speaking with Mr. Lysander, I believed I had enough evidence. The deed of transfer with a forged signature, the phony notarized paperwork, and confirmation from the real estate agency that Cassian assisted the sale. However, simply filing a lawsuit was not enough. I wanted my parents and Cassian to face the truth in front of the entire family, including relatives who had watched me grow up and heard my parents brag about their golden kid, Cassian. I wanted them to see the repercussions of their actions, not through a cold legal letter, but in person, in an unavoidable situation. I contacted Aunt Callista, my mother's older sister, who was always honest and upfront. She was the only family member who had ever complimented my efforts, saying that my grandfather would be pleased of me. Aunt Callista, I said over the phone, keeping my emotions under control. I want to organize a family gathering. Invite everyone, aunts, uncles, cousins. I have something important to say. She paused, recognizing the seriousness in my voice. Silas, is something wrong? She inquired. I merely said, I need everyone there. I'll explain later. I chose a weekend and borrowed Aunt Callista's home for the event. I informed her that it was a family update following my business travel. I didn't go into depth, but I did tell my mother that I wanted to make peace following recent conflicts. My mother, whether out of remorse or confidence that I had accepted the loss of my home, consented quickly. That's good, Silas, she murmured, relieved. The family needs to come together. Cassian will be happy to see his big brother. I clenched my jaw, concealing my rage. They were unaware that this event was not intended to promote reconciliation. It was about revealing the truth. I phoned Mr. Lysander and invited him to attend as a family friend. He agreed, presenting the trust documents and documentation I'd gathered. Are you sure you want to do this in front of the whole family, Silas? He inquired, his voice low but anxious. This will be a big shock. I nodded on the phone. They chose this path, Mr. Lysander. I'm just helping them see where it leads. On the day of the party, I arrived at Aunt Callista's house early to assist with table setup and food preparation. She glanced at me, her eyes filled with concern. Silas, are you okay? You seem different. I gave her an odd smile and rubbed her shoulder. I'm fine, Aunt Callista. Today's an important day. Family members began arriving, including Uncle Lucian, cousins, and a few close family acquaintances. Everyone was laughing and hugging as if it were a regular meeting. But my heart was pumping like a warrior preparing to fight. My parents came. My father is wearing his new clothing. My mother wore a light blue dress, her smile forced but confident. Cassian arrived late, strolling in with his typical arrogant air and wearing a white linen shirt similar to the one shown in his Maldives images. He patted my shoulder and said loudly, "Big bro, you're back. How is Europe? Don't be mad about the house thing. Life's too long for that." I glanced into his eyes and saw his arrogance, free of regret. I only nodded with a slight smile. "Yeah, Cassian, life's long." After everyone had gathered around the backyard tables, I stood up, holding a glass of wine but not drinking it. The bustling chatter subsided, and all eyes turned to me. "Thank you all for coming today," I said, my voice soft but resonant. "I just returned from 6 weeks in Europe, working on a major project. But today, I don't want to talk about work. I want to talk about family, about truth, trust, and what we do to each other." My mother stared at me with worry in her eyes. My father crossed his arms and frowned. Cassian smirked, expecting an apology or reconciliation. I placed down the wine glass and took out a stack of papers from my purse, including copies of the deed, a falsified notarized document, and images from the real estate firm. "When I went on my trip, I asked my parents to look after my craftsman house," I said, my voice slow and chilly. "The house I bought with my sweat, tears, and part of the funds from Grandpa Thaddeus's trust. But when I returned, I found out my parents sold it without asking me." Murmurs rose from the table, and Aunt Callista covered her mouth, her eyes wide. Some cousins exchanged confused looks. My mother rose, her voice trembling. "Silas, what are you doing? This isn't the place for this." I lifted my hand, motioning for her to sit. "No, Mom. This is exactly the place. Everyone needs to know the truth." I held up the documents. "This is the deed of transfer for the house. It has my signature, but I didn't sign it. This is a notarized document signed by someone named John H. Thompson, but the signature is fake. And this," I pulled out my phone, showing the photo of Cassian in front of the real estate office, "is proof that Cassian facilitated the sale, lying that I was moving abroad for work." The air became heavy. Cassian's face turned pale and he forced a laugh. "What? What are you making up, Silas? Don't blow this out of proportion." I locked eyes with him, felt all of my grief and wrath rise. "Making it up? Let Mr. Lysander explain." I motioned to Mr. Lysander, who was seated calmly at the end of the table. He stood there, clutching the trust documents, his voice low but commanding. "I am the attorney managing the Thaddeus Rowan Trust," he told me. "The Craftsman House belongs to the trust, with Silas as the sole trustee. Selling it without his consent was illegal. But more critically, the trust has a clear clause: anyone who forges, misappropriates or sells trust assets will immediately forfeit their inheritance." Gasps resonated across the table. My mother covered her face. My father sat motionless, his hands trembling. Cassian punched the table, saying, "What? What are you talking about? It's just an old house." Mr. Lysander stared at him, his words hard. "Not just the house, Mr. Cassian. You and your parents have forfeited $500,000 each from the trust, a total of $1 million, plus a vacation cabin in Big Bear. Furthermore, forging signatures and notarizations is a criminal offense. You will face legal consequences." Silence fell, interrupted only by the quiet rustle of the wind in the backyard. My mother held her face, suppressing tears. My father approached Mr. Lysander and demanded to see the trust documents. Cassian pounded the table again, saying, "What? Grandpa had that much money and left it all to Silas? Why didn't anyone tell me?" He turned to face me, his eyes bloodshot. "Silas, you knew about this and said nothing. How selfish are you?" I glanced at Cassian, as if I were staring at a pampered child. "Selfish," I said, my tone cool but keen as a sword. "I worked my whole life to prove I was worthy of Grandpa's trust. You, Cassian, only took handouts from Mom and Dad, living off deceit. Grandpa put me in charge of the trust because he believed I'd use it wisely. And now you've all stripped yourselves of your own inheritance." My mother hurried to me, holding my hand and crying, "Silas, I'm sorry. I didn't know about the trust. I just wanted to help Cassian. You're his big brother. You can forgive us, right? You can share the inheritance as planned." My father turned and pleaded. "Silas, we're family. You can't let us lose everything like this. Think it over." Cassian leaped in, his voice almost imploring. Big bro, please think it over. 2 million in inheritance isn't small. My mother had tears in her eyes. My father had a defeated countenance, and Cassian had juvenile wrath. Part of me wanted to forgive, embrace my mother, and say everything was fine. But then I remembered my rose garden, my craftsman home, and my grandfather's words. Your strength is your greatest asset. They had decided to betray me. Cassian was chosen over justice. You're not my family, I responded, my tone calm but sharp. Family doesn't steal each other's dreams. My mother slumped into a chair and sobbed uncontrollably. My father clutched her, unable to meet my gaze. Cassian stormed out of the backyard, muttering curses. The other family members gazed at me. Some people nodded, others silently departed. Aunt Callista approached and placed a hand on my shoulder. You did the right thing, Silas, she replied. Your grandfather would be proud. As everyone went, I stood in the garden, watching the sunset turn the Pasadena sky gold. Mr. Lysander stroked my shoulder. You did what you had to, he said. The legal documents are ready. We'll reclaim your house, and they'll pay the price. I nodded, but I didn't feel victorious. There was only emptiness where my affection for my family once existed. I felt like I was caught up in a whirlwind in the days after the family gathering. Mr. Lysander and his legal team acted quickly, bringing a complaint in Pasadena court on severe claims of faked signatures, false notarization, and misuse of trust assets. I spent hours in his office going over every document and piece of evidence I had obtained, from the faked deed of transfer to my mother's handwritten notes, from the phony notarized paperwork to the real estate agency's confirmation of Cassian's involvement. Each piece was a knife that reminded me of the betrayal, while also representing a step toward justice. The police acted swiftly. One morning Mr. Lysander called me. Silas, they've opened a criminal investigation. Your parents and Cassian have been summoned for questioning. I sat in my hotel room chair, my hands quivering while I held the phone. My mind was filled with images of my mother sobbing at the gathering, my father with his head down, and Cassian storming off. I didn't want them to go to jail, but I couldn't let them avoid the penalties. What will they be charged with? I inquired, my voice scarcely audible. Mr. Lysander responded, his tone steady but clear. Your parents face charges of forgery and fraud. Cassian is being charged with complicity and profiting from criminal proceeds. We have solid evidence, Silas. I nodded, but he couldn't see me. What about my house? I inquired. Mr. Lysander informed me. We're working with the buyers, Isolde and Dorian. They're victims too, so the court may void the sale and refund their money. You'll get your house back, but it will take a few months. I hung up and stared out the window. The Pasadena sunlight was as bright as the day I returned, but it no longer felt warm. The investigation went faster than I expected. I described my business travel, the shock of learning my house had been sold, and the proof I'd gathered. The officer, a middle-aged man with a stern demeanor, took detailed notes. We've checked the notarized document, he told me. The person listed as John H. Thompson doesn't exist in the notary registry. The signature on the deed of transfer has also been confirmed as forged through handwriting analysis. A thrill went through me. What does that mean? I inquired. The officer stared at me, his tone calm yet forceful. Your parents will be charged with forgery and fraud. They could face probation and restitution. Your brother Cassian will be charged with complicity, and he'll have to repay all the money he used from the house sale, including the costs of his Maldives trip. I left the police station with my thoughts reeling. Probation, restitution, repayment. The words echoed in my thoughts like a dark song. I didn't want to lose my family, but I couldn't forgive them either. They had chosen this road, stealing my dream to satisfy Cassian's lethargy. I recalled my grandfather's words. Your strength is your true asset. He was correct. My strength was not in the house. I was determined to pursue justice. In the weeks that followed, my family disintegrated. My parents were duly accused and sentenced to 3 years probation, and a significant reparation order, the majority of which was the proceeds from the sale of my house. They were compelled to mortgage their Pasadena home, where I grew up, to pay off the debt. Aunt Callista informed me that every night, my mother cried while my father sat motionless in front of the television. Cassian suffered more severe punishments. The court ordered him to refund the whole cost of his Maldives trip, more than $20,000, and punished him for involvement. Cassian was forced to confront reality when our parents no longer provided financial support and there was no trust fund. No employment, no home, and tremendous debt. I saw him once while walking by a coffee shop in downtown Pasadena. He was sitting there in a tattered t-shirt, eyes shadowed, on the phone discussing job applications. When he noticed me, he turned aside and couldn't meet my gaze. I did not stop. I had nothing further to say to him. Mr. Lysander finally got back to me after 5 months. The court overturned the sale of the Craftsman house. Isolde and Dorian received a reimbursement, and the house was legally returned to my name. The day I got the keys, I stood in front of the house. A mix of elation and sadness washed over me. The stained glass windows remained intact, but the rose garden had wilted due to neglect. When I walked inside, the familiar fragrance of wood filled my senses, but it wasn't the same. The house had been my dream, but it now bore the scars of treachery. I spent days cleaning and restoring it to its former glory. However, every fracture in the wall and every brick in the fireplace served as a reminder of what I had lost. Not only do I own property, but I also trust my family. I stood in the garden, staring at the wilting rose plants and wondering if I could revive them, or myself. My family was no longer the same. Aunt Callista remained in contact, but other family drifted apart. A few cousins called to express condolences, but no one mentioned the gathering. My parents attempted to reach me, leaving voicemails with apologies, but I did not respond. It wasn't that I refused to forgive. I wasn't ready. Maybe someday I'll sit down with them, but not now. Cassian disappeared from my radar. I heard he'd moved to another city and was working odd jobs to pay off his debts. Portion of me felt terrible for him, but a greater portion reminded me that he chose this route. He could have matured and stood on his own, but instead he chose to live off deception. I sat on the porch of my Craftsman home, a cold cup of coffee in hand. The house was mine again, but it wasn't the one I had hoped for. It was a trophy, a symbol of my will, and a reminder of the cost of justice. I remembered my grandfather, the trust, and how he had protected me long after he was gone. I wondered if he realized that one day I'd need the strength he'd given me. I stood up, strolled to the backyard, and started removing weeds and watering the remaining rose bushes. Perhaps they'll bloom again. Perhaps not. But I'd try, as I always have. Justice had been served, but my journey had not ended. I would reconstruct not only the house, but my entire life, one step at a time. While repairing the property, I started thinking about the trust fund, the $1 million I'd get when I was 35, which is now just a few months away. My parents and Cassian had forfeited their inheritance, leaving me with the $1.5 million and the Big Bear holiday cabin. But I didn't want to keep anything for myself. My grandfather taught me that genuine riches is not found in money, but in what you leave behind for the world. I decided to start the Thaddeus Rowan Foundation, a scholarship fund for young people who, like me 20 years ago, worked hard and saved every penny to achieve their aspirations. I launched it using a portion of the trust fund, providing tuition support to students who are struggling financially, but are determined. As I signed the paperwork to establish the foundation in Mr. Lysander's office, I felt my grandfather's presence as if he were beaming back at me. "Well done," I imagined Silas saying. "This demonstrates true strength." The scholarship fund soon attracted attention. A few Pasadena publications wrote about me as the man who converted anguish into optimism. I didn't enjoy being in the spotlight, but when I received thank you letters from pupils, I felt proud. One girl wrote, "Thank you, Silas. Because of your scholarship, I can continue my education and become a doctor." Reading those lines, I realized that my Craftsman home, rose garden, and even my scars had significance. My family became a distant memory. I heard they relocated to a small apartment in the outskirts to live quietly and avoid family. My mother once sent me a handwritten letter, her handwriting unsteady and full of regret. "Silas, I apologize. I merely wanted to help Cassian, but I was mistaken. If you can forgive me, I'll do anything." I read the letter and then left it on the table for several days without responding. It wasn't that I refused to forgive. I didn't know how to repair what had been damaged. Cassian, from what I heard, was living alone, introverted, and appeared to have changed since losing his riches. I wasn't sure if he was actually sorry, but I hoped for his sake that one day he'd find his way. One afternoon I sat on the porch of my Craftsman home, a hot cup of coffee in hand, looking out at the rose garden, which was now blooming vibrantly again. The red petals gleamed in the sunlight, a reminder that life may be restored even after the most severe wounds. This house, which had previously represented my ambition, was now a sign of perseverance. I had lost my family, but I had discovered the strength that my grandfather had always said I possessed. I reminisced on my trip, From the shock of hearing my house had been sold to the silent days of research, and then confronting my parents and Cassian in front of the family. In the United States, faking signatures to steal property is not commonplace. The most terrible aspect is that it can come from those closest to you. However, my tale demonstrates that justice and truth will always prevail. My parents and Cassian paid a price, not only in cash, but also in honor and trust. I wasn't pleased with it, but I didn't regret standing up for myself. I stood up, went inside, and put an antique framed portrait of my grandfather on the hearth. In the photograph, he was smiling, his eyes bright, as if he knew I would succeed. "Thank you, Grandpa," I whispered. Then I went back to the garden, picked up the watering can, and began tending to the other rose bushes. My life, like this garden, would continue to bloom.